When I got beat up at school, Grandpa said, "You gotta be tougher." When my parents yelled at me unfairly, he'd nod, "They're raising you right." I thought he didn't love me until I learned the truth. I was 10 the first time I ran to Grandpa's house, tears streaming down my face, my backpack bouncing wildly as I pedaled my bike across our small Ohio town. My cheek stung from where a kid at school had shoved me into a locker, and my heart hurt worse from the laughter that followed. I thought Grandpa would hug me, maybe offer me some of his famous oatmeal cookies and tell me it'd be okay. Instead, he sat me down at his kitchen table, his leathery hands folded, and said, "Life's unfair, kid. You gotta learn to stand up for yourself." His voice was gruff, like he was giving orders on a battlefield, not talking to his crying granddaughter. I stared at the checkered tablecloth, feeling smaller than ever. He didn't ask who hurt me or why. He just told me to toughen up and sent me home. That was the start of it. Grandpa was a retired military man, tall and wiry with a buzz cut he kept even in his 70s. His house smelled like old wood and pipe tobacco, and his walls were covered with faded photos of him in uniform, standing proud in places I'd never heard of. I used to love visiting him and Grandma, playing in their backyard with the tire swing, or listening to Grandpa's stories about his army days. But as I got older and life got messier, I started noticing how he always took the side of whoever hurt me. It didn't matter if it was fair or not. If I came to him upset, he'd brush it off with some version of, "Men don't whine, even though I was a girl," or "You gotta be stronger than that." In middle school, things got worse. A group of girls decided I was their punching bag. They'd whisper about my thrift store clothes, trip me in the cafeteria, and once they even poured soda over my math homework, laughing as the ink smudged. I'd come home humiliated, my stomach in knots, and tell my parents. They'd get mad, but their solution was always just ignore them. When I told Grandpa, hoping for some kind of wisdom, he leaned back in his recliner, his eyes narrowing like he was sizing me up. "Give him hell back," he said. "Show him you're not weak." I tried once, shoving one of the girls back in the hallway. It felt good for about 10 seconds until I got detention and the bullying got worse. When I told Grandpa about the fallout, he just shrugged. "That's how you learn." I started to feel like I was the problem. Maybe I was too soft, too weak, like Grandpa said. At home, things weren't much better. My parents were stressed all the time, bills piling up, long hours at work, and they'd snap at me over little things, like leaving dishes in the sink or forgetting to take out the trash. Once, my dad grounded me for a month because I talked back when he yelled at me for spilling juice on the carpet. It wasn't even my fault, my little brother had knocked it over. I ran to Grandpa's, hoping he'd see how unfair it was. But he just nodded at my story like he approved. "Your folks are doing what's right. Discipline makes you strong." I left his house feeling like the ground was crumbling under me. If even Grandpa thought I deserved it, maybe I did. By high school, I stopped going to Grandpa's when I was upset. I'd lock myself in my room instead, blasting music through my earbuds to drown out the world. I felt so alone, like nobody saw me or cared. I started wondering if Grandpa even loved me. He never hugged me, never said anything kind. He'd just lecture me about being tough, like I was one of his soldiers. I'd lie awake at night, replaying his words, wondering why he always sided against me. Was I that disappointing? Did he wish I was someone else? Then, when I was 16, Grandpa got sick. It started with a cough that wouldn't go away, then doctor visits, then hospital stays. Grandma was a wreck, her hands shaking as she poured coffee for visitors. I'd sit by Grandpa's bedside, watching him shrink under the hospital blankets, his gruff voice softer now. He didn't talk much, but once, when it was just us, he grabbed my hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes were sharp. "You're gonna be fine, kid," he said. "You're tougher than you think." I wanted to scream at him, to ask why he'd spent my whole life making me feel like I wasn't enough. But I just nodded, my throat tight, and left the room. He passed away a month later. The funeral was a blur, people in black, casseroles piling up in Grandma's kitchen, neighbors patting my shoulder and saying what a great man he was. I felt numb, like I was supposed to grieve but didn't know how. I was angry too, angry at him for leaving, angry at myself for not saying more when I had the chance. I helped Grandma clean out his things, sorting through old uniforms and medals, feeling like I was burying pieces of him. That's when she found the diary. It was a small, leather-bound book tucked in a drawer under some socks. Grandma handed it to me, her eyes soft. "He wrote in this every day," she said. "Maybe it'll help you understand him." I took it home, unsure if I even wanted to read it. For weeks, it sat on my nightstand untouched. I was scared of what I'd find, more proof that he thought I was weak, maybe. But one night, when I couldn't sleep, I opened it. Update 1, the diary. Reading Grandpa's diary felt like stepping into his head, and it was nothing like I expected. The pages were filled with his blocky handwriting, some entries short, some sprawling. He wrote about everything, his garden, the weather, arguments with Grandma about what to watch on TV. But what hit me hardest were the entries about me. Almost every time I'd gone to him upset, he'd written about it. And not the way I thought. One entry from when I was 12 and those girls at school were bullying me said she came over today crying about some kids picking on her. Broke my heart to see her like that. Wanted to drive to that school and give those brats a piece of my mind. But I can't. She's gotta learn to stand tall or the world will eat her alive. Told her to fight back. Hope I didn't mess it up. I sat there, staring at the page, my chest tight. He cared? He was worried about me? It didn't make sense. Why didn't he just say it? Another entry from when my parents grounded me over the juice spill said she's mad at her folks, says it's unfair. She's right, but I didn't tell her. Her dad's under pressure, trying to keep the family afloat. He's doing his best. Told her discipline's good for her, but I hate seeing her so down. Wish I could fix it without making her soft. I felt like I'd been punched. He knew it was unfair, but he still took their side? Why? As I kept reading, a pattern emerged. Grandpa was terrified of me turning out weak. He wrote about his own childhood, growing up in a rough neighborhood during the Great Depression, how his dad beat him to make him a man. He wrote about the war, watching friends die, learning to shut off his feelings to survive. He believed the world was brutal and the only way to make it was to be tougher than everyone else. Every time he told me to toughen up, he thought he was saving me. But he also wrote about how much it hurt him to see me struggle. She's got a good heart, he wrote once. Hope I'm not breaking it. I cried so hard I could barely breathe. All those years I thought he didn't love me, but he was just stuck in his own messed up way of showing it. He wasn't trying to hurt me, he was trying to protect me the only way he knew how. But it still didn't fix the pain he'd caused. I was so confused, loving him and hating him at the same time. I kept the diary under my pillow, reading it over and over, trying to make sense of it all. Update 2. A new perspective. After finding the diary, I couldn't stop thinking about Grandpa. I'd walk past his house, now just Grandma's, and feel this ache in my chest. I started noticing little things I'd ignored before, like how he'd always slip me $1 when I left, or how he'd watch me ride my bike down the street, standing on the porch until I was out of sight. I realized he'd been looking out for me in his own quiet way, even if he couldn't say it. But the diary also made me see how his advice had shaped me, and not always in a good way. I'd spent so much of my life trying to be tough, bottling up my feelings, thinking crying was weak. It made me push people away, like when my best friend tried to help me through a breakup and I snapped at her to leave me alone. I didn't want to be that person anymore. I wanted to figure out who I was without Grandpa's voice in my head telling me to be stronger. I started small. Instead of hiding when I was upset, I talked to Grandma. She'd listen, her hands busy knitting, and tell me stories about Grandpa I'd never heard, like how he'd cry at sappy movies but pretend it was allergies, or how he'd stay up late worrying about me when I was a kid. It helped me see him as more than just the gruff guy who lectured me. He was human, flawed, carrying his own pain. One day, I found an old photo in the diary tucked between the pages. It was me, maybe 6, sitting on Grandpa's shoulders at a county fair, both of us grinning. On the back, in his handwriting, it said, "My girl." Proud of her. I broke down again, but this time it felt different, like I was letting go of some of the anger. I realized I could love him and still be mad at how he'd hurt me. It didn't have to be one or the other. But then something unexpected happened. I was helping Grandma clean out the attic, and we found a box of letters Grandpa had written but never sent. Most were to his old army buddies, but one was addressed to me. My hands shook as I opened it. It was dated a week before he died. Update 3. The letter. The letter changed everything. Grandpa wrote that he knew he was running out of time and he wanted to set things right. He said he'd always been proud of me, but he was scared he'd pushed me too hard. "I wanted you to be strong because I know how cruel the world can be," he wrote. "But I see now I might have made you feel alone. That's the last thing I wanted. You're tougher than I ever was because you've got heart. Don't lose that." He ended it with, "I love you, kid. Always have." I sat on the attic floor, the letter crinkling in my hands, tears dripping onto the paper. All those years I'd wanted to hear those words, and here they were, too late. But they weren't too late, not really. They gave me something to hold onto, a piece of him I hadn't known existed. I felt like he was finally seeing me not as a soldier he needed to train, but as his granddaughter. The letter also made me rethink my own life. I'd been so focused on proving I was tough, I'd forgotten how to let people in. I started reaching out more, like apologizing to my friend for pushing her away, or talking to my parents about how their yelling made me feel. It wasn't easy, they got defensive at first, but we started having real conversations and it felt like we were finally on the same team. I also found a new way to connect with Grandpa. I started volunteering at a community center, helping kids who were going through tough times like I had. I didn't lecture them about being strong. I just listened, shared stories, and let them know they weren't alone. It felt like I was honoring the best parts of Grandpa, the parts that cared, even if he didn't know how to show it, while breaking the cycle of pain he'd passed down. Finale, finding peace. A year after Grandpa's death, I visited his grave for the first time. It was a quiet cemetery, the grass damp from morning dew, the air smelling of pine. I brought the diary and the letter, sitting cross-legged by his headstone. I didn't know what to say, so I just started reading his words back to him, my voice shaking. I told him I understood why he did what he did, but I wished he'd hugged me more, told me he loved me sooner. I told him I was okay, that I was finding my own kind of strength, one that didn't mean hiding my heart. I left a photo on his grave, the one of us at the fair. It felt right, like a way to say, we're good. As I walked away, the weight I'd carried for so long felt lighter. I wasn't the weak kid he'd worried about or the tough one he'd tried to mold. I was just me, and that was enough. Grandpa's diary and letter are on my bookshelf now, next to a candle I light when I miss him. They remind me that love can be messy, that people can hurt you while trying to save you. They also remind me to keep my heart open even when it's hard. I'm still figuring things out, but I know one thing for sure. I'm stronger than I thought, not because I'm tough, but because I'm not afraid to feel.